6 months had passed since Officer Ethan Carter lost his clothes during a deadly pursuit. The gunfight had lasted only seconds, but for Ethan it replayed every night like a nightmare with no ending. He took an indefinite leave of absence. His therapist urged him to leave the city behind and find somewhere quiet, somewhere untouched by painful memories. Ethan didn't argue. The only things he brought with him were his aging pickup truck and Ranger the German Shepherd K9, who had served faithfully by his side for 8 years. Ranger was getting older. Gray hairs had begun to appear around his muzzle, and his stride was no longer as quick as it once was, but his instincts remained as sharp as ever. To Ethan, Ranger wasn't just a police dog. He was the last loyal friend who had stayed after everything else had fallen apart. One evening, while browsing property listings without much interest, Ethan stopped at a strange advertisement. Cabin inside a mountain cave. $400, cash only. He chuckled. $400 for an entire house. Either it was a scam or there was a reason nobody wanted it. Curious, he opened the listing. The first photograph showed a small wooden cabin resting deep inside an enormous cave. Sunlight poured through cracks in the stone ceiling, bathing the cabin in warm golden light. It looked peaceful, almost magical. There was no address, no seller's name, only a short message. If you're serious about buying it, meet at mile marker 17 on Black Hollow Trail this Saturday morning. At that exact moment, Ranger stood up. The old dog walked over to the computer screen and stared silently at the photograph of the cabin before letting out a quiet whimper. Ethan frowned. "You want to see it." Ranger gave a slow wag of his tail. It was the first time Ethan had ever seen him react to a photograph. Saturday morning arrived, wrapped in thick mountain fog. Ethan's old pickup rolled slowly into the Black Hollow Mountains. The farther he drove, the colder the air became. At mile marker 17, an elderly man was already waiting. He was thin, with messy white hair and nervous eyes that kept scanning the forest behind him. "You're Ethan?" the old man asked. "That's right." Without another word, the man handed him a stack of legal documents. "This is the deed." Ethan examined every page carefully. Everything appeared legitimate. "No tour?" Ethan asked. The old man shook his head. "You won't need one." "Why not?" The man remained silent for several seconds before answering in a hoarse voice. "Because once you step inside, you'll understand." The atmosphere suddenly felt much heavier. Even so, Ethan counted out $400. The old man grabbed the cash almost too quickly, as though afraid Ethan might change his mind. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Don't stay after sunset," Ethan called after him. "Why, the old man never looked back for the past 10 years. No one has spent more than one night there." Then he climbed into his truck and disappeared down the mountain road. The trail to the cave stretched nearly 2 miles through dense forest. Ranger trotted ahead, but the closer they came to the mountain, the slower he moved. His ears stood upright. His tail dropped low. Every few steps he paused to test the air. Ethan recognized the behavior immediately. That was Ranger's search posture whenever he sensed something unusual during rescue missions. Soon the cave entrance appeared behind a wall of moss-covered stone. Inside, everything was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, only the distant echo of water dripping somewhere deep within the mountain. Ethan switched on his flashlight. "Let's go." They stepped inside together. After several minutes, darkness slowly gave way to natural light. Then Ethan froze. In the center of the massive cavern stood the cabin, perfectly preserved. Exactly like the photographs. Golden beams of sunlight streamed through the cave ceiling, making the little house look almost unreal. Ethan smiled. "Looks like I just made the best deal of my life." But Ranger didn't move. The old German Shepherd stood perfectly still. His eyes were fixed on the darkness behind the cabin. The fur along his back slowly rose. Ethan hadn't seen that reaction since their final police operation together. Ranger, no response. Without warning, the dog sprinted toward the rear of the cabin. He stopped in front of what looked like a solid stone wall, sniffing furiously before letting out a heartbreaking whine. It wasn't a warning bark. It wasn't aggression. It sounded like grief. Like someone who had finally found something they had been searching for years. Ethan hurried over. He placed a hand against the cold stone wall. Suddenly, Ranger lunged forward and began clawing at the rock with desperate force, barking again and again. For the first time in 8 years, Ethan saw something in his partner's eyes that terrified him. Not fear, not anger, recognition. And in that instant, Ethan realized one thing. Whatever lay hidden behind that wall, Ranger had never forgotten it. Ranger refused to move. His front paws kept scraping against the stone wall with frantic determination, sending bits of dust and loose gravel scattering across the cave floor. Each scratch echoed through the enormous cavern, making the silence feel even heavier. Ethan had worked with K-9 units long enough to know the difference between curiosity and certainty. This wasn't curiosity. Ranger had found something. Easy, buddy, the dog ignored him. Instead, he barked once. A short, sharp bark Ethan recognized immediately. It was Ranger's trained human scent located signal. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He aimed his flashlight across the wall. At first glance, it appeared completely natural. Thick limestone damp with moisture covered every inch. But when he crouched lower, something caught his attention. A narrow crack. Perfectly straight. Too straight. Nature didn't make lines like that. Ethan removed the multi-tool from his belt and wedged its flat edge into the crack. Nothing. He pushed harder. Still nothing. Come on. With one final shove, a small stone shifted inward. A hollow sound echoed from behind the wall. Ethan froze. The wall wasn't solid. Someone had sealed something behind it. Ranger barked again, louder this time. He stepped back, giving Ethan room, almost as if he understood exactly what needed to happen. Ethan searched around the cabin until he found an old rusted pry bar leaning beside the fireplace. It looked ancient, but sturdy. He forced it into the widening gap. The stone resisted. Then, crack. A fist-sized rock tumbled onto the ground. Cold air rushed out from the opening. Not the cool air of the cave. This air was different, stale, still, as though it had been trapped for years. Ethan widened the hole just enough to shine his flashlight inside. A narrow passage disappeared into darkness. His pulse quickened. Someone had built this. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person. The ceiling forced Ethan to duck as he slowly moved forward. Ranger stayed close behind Nose, constantly sweeping the ground. The smell inside was strange, old wood, wet stone, and something else. Smoke, not fresh smoke. The lingering scent of countless fires burned over many months. After nearly 20 feet, the tunnel opened into a hidden chamber. Ethan stopped breathing. The room wasn't empty. Someone had lived here. A small wooden cot rested against one wall. Nearby stood a handmade table, a cracked lantern, empty food cans, a metal cup, folded blankets covered with years of dust. It wasn't the shelter of a hiker. It looked like someone had survived here for a very long time. Ranger walked slowly around the room, sniffing every object with heartbreaking intensity. Then he stopped beside the bed. He lowered his head and quietly whimpered. Ethan had never seen him act this way. Almost. Like he recognized the scent. "Who were you?" Ethan whispered. His flashlight swept across the walls. Hundreds of tiny marks had been carved into the stone. Vertical lines, groups of 5. Someone had been counting days, maybe weeks, maybe years. Near the corner, another carving caught his eye. 2 simple letters, C.B. Beneath them was a sentence scratched into the rock with shaking hands. "If someone finds this, please don't stop looking." Ethan swallowed hard. The writing wasn't ancient. The grooves were still surprisingly sharp. Whoever carved those words hadn't expected to survive. Ranger suddenly lifted his head. his ears locked toward the back of the chamber. Another whimper escaped his throat. He walked to a loose pile of stones stacked neatly against the wall. Without hesitation, he began digging. One stone, then another. Dust filled the air. Ethan hurried over to help. Within seconds, they uncovered a small, rusted metal box hidden beneath the rocks. It had no lock, only a faded blue ribbon tied around it. Ethan carefully untied the ribbon. Inside lay several worn photographs, a silver necklace, and a small leather notebook. The first photograph showed a smiling teenage girl standing beside a lake. She couldn't have been older than 16. On the back, someone had written in faded ink, "Claire Bennett, Summer Festival." The second photograph was different. Claire looked frightened. She kept glancing over her shoulder as though someone had been following her. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He reached for the notebook. The leather was cracked with age. When he opened the first page, dust drifted into the air. The handwriting was uneven. The very first sentence made his blood run cold. "If you're reading this, it means I failed to stay hidden." Ethan turned to the next page. Before he could read another word, Ranger suddenly spun toward the tunnel entrance. His entire body became rigid. A deep growl rumbled from his chest. Not at Ethan. At something outside. Then came the sound. Crunch. A boot stepping on loose gravel. Someone else had just entered the cave. Ethan closed the notebook instantly. Every instinct sharpened. The sound came again. Crunch. Slow, deliberate. Someone was walking across the gravel outside the hidden chamber. Ranger stepped in front of Ethan without being commanded. His body became a solid wall of muscle ears, pinned forward eyes, fixed on the tunnel entrance. The growl in his throat grew deeper. Ethan quietly switched off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. Only a thin ribbon of sunlight slipped through tiny cracks in the cave above, barely reaching the hidden chamber. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a faint beam of light swept across the tunnel entrance. Someone else had a flashlight. Ethan held his breath. The light lingered for several seconds before moving away. Another footstep echoed. Then another. The stranger wasn't searching randomly. Whoever it was knew exactly where to walk. After nearly a minute, the footsteps slowly faded into the distance. Neither Ethan nor Ranger moved. 5 long minutes passed before Ethan whispered, "Stay." Ranger remained perfectly still. Ethan carefully peeked through the narrow opening leading back to the cabin. Nobody. The cavern looked empty again. Only the abandoned cabin stood beneath the shafts of sunlight, as silent as before. He stepped out cautiously. Nothing. No voices. No movement. But near the cabin door, something caught his eye. Fresh footprints, large hiking boots. The edges were still crisp in the damp dust. Someone had been there only moments earlier. They had walked to the cabin, stopped, then left, without entering. Almost as if they had been checking whether someone had arrived. Ethan's pulse quickened. The old man had been right. Someone still came here. Back inside the hidden chamber, Ethan reopened the notebook. The first several pages described Claire's struggle to survive. She wrote about collecting rainwater, fishing in underground streams, living without light for weeks at a time. But everything changed halfway through the journal. The handwriting became shaky, uneven, filled with fear. "I saw them again today. They're still looking for me. They wear uniforms, so nobody believes they're dangerous." Ethan frowned. Uniforms. Forest rangers, police officers, security guards. The next page answered nothing. Instead, Claire described hearing radios in the woods at night. Vehicles climbing the mountain. Men calling each other's names. Then one sentence had been pressed so hard into the paper that it nearly tore through. "Never trust Captain Hale." Ethan stared at the name. Captain Victor Hale, his former commanding officer. That couldn't be right. Victor Hale had spent nearly 30 years in law enforcement. Decorated, respected, admired across the county. The idea seemed impossible. Yet Claire had written the name repeatedly, again and again and again. Ranger suddenly sniffed the notebook. Then he let out a low whine. His eyes never left the page. Ethan slowly looked at him. "You recognize this scent, don't you?" Ranger gently touched the notebook with his nose, then lowered his head. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make Ethan uneasy. He pulled out his phone. No signal, not even one bar. The cave blocked everything. If he wanted answers, he would have to return to town. Before leaving, Ethan searched the chamber one last time. Most of the supplies had long since rotted away, but beneath the wooden cot he found something unexpected. A small brass dog tag. At first he assumed it belonged to a pet. Then he turned it over. His heart nearly stopped. Stamped into the metal were three familiar words: Black Hollow K9 Unit. Below them was an identification number. K907. Ethan knew that number. He had seen it hundreds of times. He slowly looked toward Ranger. The old German Shepherd wore a newer tag around his neck now, but years ago, before Ethan became his handler, K907 had belonged to Ranger. The tag should have been locked inside the department archives. It should never have been here. Unless Ranger had entered this cave years ago. Ethan's mind raced. "That's why you reacted. You've been here before." Ranger looked at him quietly, almost sadly. Suddenly, everything made sense. The familiar scent, the desperate scratching, the heart-breaking whine. This wasn't the first time Ranger had found this place. It was the first time someone had listened. As Ethan slipped the notebook and the old dog tag into his backpack, Ranger's ears snapped upright again. This time, the reaction was even stronger. He rushed toward the cave entrance, barking sharply. Ethan followed. They reached the cabin just in time to see a dark SUV disappearing beyond the trees outside the cave. The vehicle was too far away to identify, but sunlight flashed across something mounted on its roof. A red and blue emergency light bar, not a civilian vehicle, a police vehicle. Ethan's stomach tightened. Someone from the department had been here. The question was, had they come looking for Claire's secret or for him? Ethan didn't drive straight home. Instead, he headed toward the Black Hollow Sheriff's Office. The notebook, Claire's photographs, and Ranger's old K9 tag sat inside his backpack on the passenger seat. Every few minutes he glanced at them, trying to make sense of what he'd discovered. One question refused to leave his mind. How had Ranger's original tag ended up inside a hidden chamber that no one was supposed to know existed? The answer could only mean one thing. Years ago, Ranger had searched that cave. Someone had buried the truth afterward. The sheriff's office was unusually quiet. Most deputies were already out on patrol. Ethan entered through the rear entrance using his old key card. Although he was on leave, his access privileges hadn't been revoked. Ranger walked silently beside him. As they reached the records room, Ethan noticed something strange. The archive door was unlocked. It was never left unlocked. He stepped inside. Rows of steel cabinets stretched across the room beneath cold fluorescent lights. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Ethan searched the missing persons database until one file appeared on the screen. Claire Bennett, missing, age 16, case closed, his eyebrows knitted together, closed. He opened the digital record. Only 3 pages. A missing teenager's investigation should have filled hundreds. Witness interviews, search maps, evidence logs, officer reports. Instead, there was almost nothing. The official conclusion read, "Subject believed to have voluntarily left home. Investigation terminated after 72 hours. Ethan stared at the screen. 72 hours. No experienced investigator would close the disappearance of a 16-year-old girl that quickly. Something had been erased. He opened the evidence inventory. Empty. Search reports. Empty. Photographs. Deleted. Interview recordings. Unavailable. Almost the entire case had vanished. Someone hadn't simply closed the investigation. Someone had cleaned it. Ranger suddenly lifted his head. His nose twitched toward one of the filing cabinets. He walked directly to the bottom drawer and pawed at it twice. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" He opened the drawer. Inside were dozens of old paper files scheduled for disposal. As he sorted through them, a thin manila folder slipped onto the floor. There was no label, only a faded evidence sticker. Inside rested a single photograph. Ethan picked it up carefully. His pulse accelerated. It showed Claire standing near the entrance of the same mountain cave. She wasn't smiling. She looked terrified. She was staring directly at the camera behind her. Barely visible between the trees stood the shadow of a man. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 3 words. "He found me." Ethan felt a chill crawl across his skin. That picture had never been uploaded into the official file. Someone had hidden it. A voice suddenly broke the silence. "Working on your vacation," Ethan turned quickly. Captain Victor Hale stood in the doorway, tall, calm. His uniform looked perfectly pressed as always. A warm smile rested on his face. "Captain, I heard you came back. I was just looking through some old files." Victor stepped into the room without hesitation. What case? Ethan kept his expression neutral. "An old missing person report." Victor nodded casually. "Those old files can make you lose sleep." His eyes drifted toward the folder in Ethan's hand for only a second, but Ethan noticed. So Victor asked, "Which case caught your attention?" Ethan answered carefully. "Just a girl named Claire Bennett." For the first time, Victor's smile faded. Only slightly. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Ethan did. "That one," Victor said, quietly. "Sad story. You remember it." Victor folded his arms. "I signed the paperwork. She ran away. Nothing more to it." Ethan studied his face. There wasn't the slightest sign of emotion, just calm certainty. Exactly the kind of certainty that made experienced detectives suspicious. Victor looked down at Ranger. The old German shepherd stared back without blinking. Then something unexpected happened. Ranger growled, softly, deep in his chest. Ethan froze. Ranger had never growled at Victor before. Not once. Victor laughed awkwardly. "I guess he doesn't recognize me anymore." But Ranger didn't stop. His ears flattened. His body became rigid. Every instinct told Ethan the dog was seeing something his eyes couldn't. Victor took one slow step backward. "Anyway," he said with another smile, "don't spend too much time chasing ghosts." Then he turned and walked away. The moment he disappeared down the hallway, Ranger barked, once, sharp. "Urgent?" The same alert bark he used whenever a suspect tried to flee. Ethan looked back at the photograph, then toward the hallway, then at the notebook inside his backpack. Claire had written, "Never trust Captain Hale." Ranger had just growled at him. And now, for the first time, Ethan was beginning to believe they were both telling the truth. Ethan waited until midnight before returning to the sheriff's office. He couldn't stop thinking about Claire's notebook. More importantly, he couldn't stop thinking about Captain Victor Hale. If Claire had written the truth, then someone inside the department had buried her case. Ranger followed silently as Ethan unlocked the rear entrance. The old police station was almost empty. Only the dispatcher remained on the night shift. Instead of entering the records room again, Ethan walked downstairs to the evidence archive. Most people forgot it existed. Thousands of old audio recordings were stored there. Emergency calls, radio traffic, dispatch logs. If Claire had ever asked for help, this was the place to find it. After 20 minutes of searching, Ethan found her file number, one audio recording, 3 minutes, marked corrupted. He plugged in a pair of headphones. Static filled the speakers. Then, a frightened teenage voice. "Please, somebody help me." Ethan froze. It was Claire. "I'm hiding." They found the cabin. Heavy breathing, branches snapping. Then another voice in the distance. A man's voice. "Search the North Trail. More footsteps," Claire whispered again. "They have police radios." "I don't know who I can trust." The recording suddenly crackled. Another man spoke. His voice was calm, commanding. Dispatch, cancel all remaining search teams. I'll handle this personally. The recording ended. No explanation. No rescue. Only silence. Ethan slowly removed the headphones. His hands were shaking. Someone had answered Claire's emergency call. Then shut the search down. Ranger suddenly lifted his head. He stared toward the hallway outside the archive. A second later, footsteps. Someone was approaching. Ethan switched off the monitor. The archive door opened. A janitor pushed in a cleaning cart. He smiled politely. Sorry, officer. Didn't know anyone was down here. Ethan nodded. No problem. The man left. But Ranger continued staring at the closed door. His growl never faded. Ethan copied the audio file onto a flash drive. As he was about to leave, another document appeared on the screen. 911 call activity log. Only one line remained. The operator's notes had been deleted. The responding officer's name had been deleted. Everything had been erased, except the final authorization. Case closed by Captain Victor Hale. Ethan felt the room spin. Claire hadn't disappeared. She had asked for help, and someone had made sure nobody reached her. Outside, rain had begun falling. Ethan and Ranger hurried toward the truck. Before opening the driver's door, Ranger suddenly barked. Once. Sharp. He was staring at the windshield. A white envelope rested beneath the wiper blade. Ethan hadn't seen it before. There was no name, only 4 words written in black ink. Stop digging or leave town. He looked around. The parking lot was empty. No headlights, no people, only the sound of rain. Ranger sniffed the envelope once, then growled toward the darkness beyond the trees. Someone had been watching them. And whoever it was now knew Ethan had reopened Claire Bennett's case. Ethan barely slept. The anonymous warning sat on his kitchen table beside Claire's notebook and the copied 911 recording. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Someone inside law enforcement had hidden the truth. But one question still haunted him. If Claire had escaped the search, where had she gone? At sunrise, Ethan loaded his backpack and drove back to the cave. Ranger seemed unusually restless. The moment the truck stopped, the old German shepherd jumped out and raced toward the entrance without waiting for a command. Ranger the dog never looked back. Inside the cavern, everything appeared exactly as Ethan had left it. The cabin stood in complete silence. The hidden chamber remained untouched, yet Ranger ignored both. Instead, he sniffed the stone floor around the cabin, moving slowly in wide circles. His nose suddenly stopped near the old fireplace. He scratched once, twice, then barked. Ethan knelt beside him. The floor looked ordinary, solid stone, but when he tapped it with the handle of his flashlight, one section produced a dull, hollow sound. His heartbeat quickened. Another hidden space. He searched the cabin until he found the rusty pry bar again. After several hard strikes, a flat stone slab shifted just enough to reveal a narrow opening beneath it. Cold air drifted upward. Ranger immediately lowered himself into the darkness. Wait, too late. The dog had already disappeared. Ethan switched on his flashlight and climbed down after him. The tunnel below was much narrower than the first one. The ceiling forced Ethan onto one knee in several places. Fresh air flowed through the passage. That meant there had to be another exit. After nearly 50 feet, the tunnel widened. Ranger was waiting. Standing perfectly still, his eyes were fixed on something lying against the wall. Ethan raised the flashlight, a faded blue backpack. Dust covered most of it, but the zipper was still closed. Carefully he opened it. Inside were a flashlight with dead batteries, a folded blanket, a water bottle, and a county road map. Several routes had been marked in red ink. One trail led north into the mountains. Beside it, Claire had written only 3 words, "Never stop moving." Ethan unfolded the map completely. Every safe stream, every abandoned hunting cabin, every cave entrance. Claire had marked them all. She hadn't wandered blindly. She had planned her escape. Ranger suddenly sniffed the backpack again. Then he turned and followed the tunnel deeper. Ethan hurried after him. The passage climbed steadily upward before ending beneath a thick curtain of vines. Daylight filtered through tiny gaps. Ethan pushed the vines aside. They stepped outside. He stopped in amazement. The second exit was almost half a mile from the main cave entrance, completely hidden by rocks and dense forest. No search team would have found it without knowing exactly where to look. Claire had escaped. She hadn't vanished. She had simply used a path no one else knew existed. Ethan looked back at Ranger. The old German shepherd quietly wagged his tail, almost proudly, as if saying, "She made it." Then, Ranger's ears snapped forward. His body became rigid. He stared toward the trees. A distant engine echoed through the forest. Seconds later, a black SUV rolled slowly along the logging road below. It stopped. Two men stepped out. One of them pointed directly toward the hillside where Ethan stood. The other lifted a pair of binoculars. Ethan immediately pulled Ranger behind the rocks. His pulse pounded. Those men weren't hikers. They knew exactly where to look, and someone had followed him back to the mountain. Ethan and Ranger remained hidden behind the rocks. The two men below didn't move immediately. One scanned the hillside through binoculars while the other studied a folded map. They spoke briefly before walking toward the cave entrance. "They know about the cave," Ethan whispered. Ranger let out a low growl. Ethan reached for his phone. Still no signal. Calling for help wasn't an option. He waited until the men disappeared into the trees before carefully following them from above, staying hidden among the pines. Within minutes they reached the cave. Neither man hesitated. They walked straight inside. "They've been here before," Ethan murmured. No one could have found the entrance that quickly without knowing exactly where it was. Using the second tunnel, Ethan and Ranger quietly returned to the hidden chamber. The cave echoed with distant footsteps. The strangers were searching the cabin, drawers opened, furniture scraped across the floor. One of them shouted, "Nothing here!" Another voice answered, "Keep looking." Hale said, "The notebook has to be here." Ethan's heart skipped. They weren't treasure hunters. They were looking for Claire's journal, which meant Captain Victor Hale knew it still existed. Ranger looked toward Ethan. Neither of them made a sound. After several tense minutes, the voices faded. A vehicle engine started outside. Silence returned. Only then did Ethan finally breathe again. Before leaving, Ethan searched the hidden chamber one more time. This time, he noticed something he had missed. One loose stone near the bed carried scratch marks, fresh scratch marks. He carefully lifted it. Beneath the stone was a narrow cloth pouch. Inside rested an old film roll. Not photographs, undeveloped camera film. Ethan frowned. Why hide this? He slipped it into his backpack. If the film still worked, it might contain the answers Claire had risked her life to protect. An hour later, Ethan arrived at the only photography shop still operating in Black Hollow County. The owner, an elderly woman named Martha, had developed film for local police officers for nearly 40 years. She examined the roll. "This is old. Can you develop it?" She smiled. If the negatives survived, the process took almost an hour. Ethan waited nervously. Ranger lay quietly beside his chair. Finally, Martha returned holding several photographs. "You'd better look at these." The first few images showed forest trails, the cave entrance, nothing unusual. Then came another photograph. Ethan froze. Several men in sheriff's uniforms were standing beside unmarked wooden crates deep in the forest. One of them was unmistakable. Captain Victor Hale. The final photograph was even worse. Claire had secretly captured Hale shaking hands with two armed strangers beside the crates. Money lay spread across the hood of a black SUV. It wasn't proof of murder, but it was undeniable evidence of corruption. Martha looked at Ethan. "Should I ask questions?" He slowly shook his head. "No." "Actually, please forget you ever developed this film." Her expression turned serious. "I understand." As Ethan gathered the photographs, one image slipped onto The floor. Ranger sniffed it once, then his ears shot upright. He wasn't looking at the picture. He was staring through the shop window. A black SUV had stopped across the street, the same one from the mountain. Its engine remained running. The driver never got out. He simply watched the shop. Ethan slowly picked up the photographs. They know. He didn't know how. He didn't know who had warned them. But somehow, they already knew the film had been developed. The SUV's headlights suddenly switched on. Then, without warning, it pulled away from the curb and began following Ethan's truck as he drove out of town. The black SUV stayed 3 cars behind Ethan's pickup. Not too close, not too far. Professional. Ethan checked his rearview mirror again. They're still there. Ranger, sitting in the passenger seat, turned toward the back window and let out a low growl. His eyes never left the SUV. Instead of driving home, Ethan turned onto an old logging road that wound through the forest. If the vehicle followed, there would be no doubt. It did. Every turn, every fork. The SUV remained behind him. "They're tailing us." Ethan suddenly slammed on the brakes. His pickup skidded sideways, blocking the narrow dirt road. The black SUV stopped nearly 50 yards away. Neither driver moved. For almost 30 seconds, the two vehicles faced each other in complete silence. Then the SUV slowly backed up, turned around, and disappeared into the trees. It wasn't fear. It was discipline. Whoever was inside had no intention of being identified. Ethan drove straight to the county prosecutor's office. He trusted only one person now, Assistant District Attorney Laura Bennett. She had built her reputation by exposing public corruption, and more importantly, she had once worked with Ethan on a kidnapping case. When Laura saw the photographs spread across her desk, her expression changed instantly. "Where did you get these? I can't tell you." She picked up the image of Captain Hale exchanging money beside the black SUV. "If these are authentic, they're authentic." Laura looked at him for a long moment. "Ethan, this isn't enough to convict him. I know, but it's enough to reopen Claire Bennett's case." Laura suddenly froze. "Bennett, you know her." Laura slowly leaned back in her chair. "I represented Claire's parents after she disappeared. They never believed she ran away. They begged the department to continue searching. They were ignored." She looked down at the photographs again. "If Hale buried this, he's been lying for years." Before Ethan could answer, Laura's office phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID. Her face tightened. "It's Hale," she answered calmly. "Victor!" a cheerful voice echoed through the speaker. "Laura, have you seen Ethan today?" "No. I heard he stopped by your office." He didn't. A brief silence followed. Then Hale laughed softly. "Tell him to be careful. The mountains can be dangerous." The line went dead. Laura slowly lowered the receiver. He knows I'm helping you." Ethan left through the rear exit. He didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street. Inside, a man lifted a camera. Click. Another photograph. Click. Every move Ethan made was being documented. That evening, Ethan returned to the cabin. He needed one final piece of evidence before turning everything over to federal investigators. Ranger walked ahead with unusual confidence, choosing the second tunnel instead of the main entrance. Halfway through the passage, the dog stopped. He sniffed the air once, then barked sharply. Someone had been there, recently. Ethan switched off his flashlight and listened. Nothing, only dripping water. Still, Ranger refused to move. His body remained stiff, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Ethan carefully swept his flashlight across the tunnel. Fresh footprints. Not his, not Claire's. Large boot prints, only hours old. They led deeper into the passage. Ethan followed cautiously. The tunnel opened into a narrow stone chamber he had never seen before. Unlike the other rooms, this one contained almost nothing. Just a wooden chair, an old lantern, and dozens of newspaper clippings pinned to the wall. Every article featured the same headline: "Local teen still missing. Search suspended. Sheriff's office closes investigation. Claire had collected every article written about her disappearance. Near the center of the wall hung one final photograph. It had clearly been added much later. Ethan stepped closer. His breath caught. The picture showed Claire, older now, maybe 20 years old, alive, standing beside a waterfall somewhere deep in the mountains. On the back, written in fresh ink, were 6 chilling words. "I'm still alive. Don't follow me." Ethan's pulse raced. Claire had returned to the cave, not years ago, recently. Maybe only days earlier. Ranger gently sniffed the photograph, then wagged his tail. Just once. For the first time since entering the cave, the old German shepherd looked hopeful. He recognized the scent. It was fresh. Claire was alive. She had survived all these years. Suddenly, bang, a gunshot exploded outside the cave. Stone fragments rained from the ceiling. Ranger barked furiously. Another shot echoed through the mountain. A man's voice shouted from the entrance. "Ethan Carter, we know you're in there. Come out, or we'll bury you inside that cave forever." The first gunshot echoed through the cave like thunder. Chunks of limestone crashed from the ceiling, filling the tunnel with dust. Ranger immediately moved in front of Ethan, barking furiously toward the entrance. Another shot rang out. The bullet struck the stone wall only a few feet away, spraying sharp fragments across the floor. Ethan Carter, a familiar voice, shouted, "You have nowhere left to run." Ethan recognized it instantly. Captain Victor Hale. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wanted Ethan to know exactly who had come for him. Ethan crouched behind a large boulder and carefully peeked toward the entrance. Flashlight beams danced across the cavern. At least 4 armed men spread out in a tactical formation. They weren't searching. They were hunting. "They're blocking the main entrance," Ethan whispered. Ranger turned toward the second tunnel, the hidden escape route. "Good idea." The two slipped quietly into the narrow passage before another volley of gunfire shattered the silence. They reached the second chamber in less than a minute. Ethan pulled out his phone. Still no signal. He tried the emergency satellite beacon built into his police radio. Nothing. The mountains swallowed every transmission. "We're on our own." Ranger sniffed the air, then suddenly ran deeper into the tunnel. "Ranger." The old German shepherd ignored him. He stopped beside the wall where Claire's newspaper clippings still hung. His nose pressed against the stone beneath the photographs. Then he barked. Ethan frowned. What now? He pushed against the wall. Nothing. He looked closer. A tiny iron ring had been hidden inside a crack. He pulled it. The wall shifted with a loud grinding sound. A narrow stone door slowly opened. Another passage. Claire had hidden yet another escape route. She thought of everything. The tunnel climbed steeply upward. Fresh air drifted inside. Claire must have used it dozens of times. As Ethan hurried forward, Ranger suddenly slowed. The dog wasn't barking anymore. He was listening. Then a faint voice echoed ahead. Weak, hoarse. Almost impossible to hear. "In help." Ethan froze. He looked at Ranger. The German shepherd stared into the darkness. The voice came again. "Please." Without hesitation, Ethan sprinted forward. The tunnel ended inside a small natural chamber. A woman sat against the wall, wrapped in old blankets. Her clothes were worn. Her face was thin. Long brown hair fell over her shoulders. She lifted frightened eyes toward the light. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Ranger slowly walked toward her. The woman began to cry. "Ranger!" She whispered the dog's name as if she had never forgotten it. The old German shepherd let out a heartbreaking whine and gently rested his head in her lap. Tears streamed down her face. "You came back." Ethan felt his heart pound. "Claire." She nodded. "I knew. One day someone would find the notebook." "You've been here all this time." "No. I kept moving. I only returned a few days ago." Before Ethan could ask another question, a distant gunshot echoed through the tunnel, then another. Hale's men had discovered the hidden passage. "They're coming," Claire whispered. They'll kill all of us. Ethan helped Claire to her feet. She was weak, but able to walk. Is there another exit? She nodded. About 200 yards ahead. They hurried through the winding tunnel, while Ranger stayed several steps behind, repeatedly looking back toward the approaching danger. Then came shouting. I found them. Flashlights appeared around the corner. Bullets slammed into the stone walls. Ethan pushed Claire behind a rock. Stay down. He returned fire twice. The narrow tunnel exploded with echoes. Hale's men ducked for cover. For a few precious seconds, neither side moved. Then Captain Hale himself stepped into view. He wasn't aiming his weapon. He smiled. So, you really found her. Claire's entire body trembled. Don't listen to him, Ethan said. Hale laughed softly. You know, Claire, I offered you a chance. You could have walked away. You chose to become a witness. Claire's voice shook. I saw what you were doing. You were selling evidence. You murdered Deputy Collins. Hale's smile disappeared. So you remember. He slowly raised his pistol. You should have stayed hidden. Before he could fire, Ranger exploded forward. The old German shepherd launched himself through the air with every ounce of strength he had left. He slammed into Hale's arm. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Ethan rushed forward, tackling Hale onto the rocky ground. The two men struggled violently. The gun slid across the floor. One of Hale's deputies reached for it. Claire kicked it away just in time. Another deputy grabbed Ethan from behind. Everything dissolved into chaos. Ranger bit down on the deputy's sleeve, forcing him to release Ethan. Hale threw a hard punch that split Ethan's lip. Blood filled his mouth. Still, Ethan refused to let go. You buried an innocent girl. Hale snarled. I buried a problem. He reached for a hidden backup pistol strapped to his ankle. Claire saw it first. Ethan, without thinking, she grabbed a loose rock and struck Hale's wrist. The pistol flew across the tunnel. At that exact moment, the unmistakable sound of helicopters thundered overhead. Then came amplified voices from outside the mountain. Federal agents, drop your weapons. Hale's expression changed instantly. For the first time in years, the man who had terrorized everyone else looked afraid. The deafening roar of helicopters shook the mountain. Powerful spotlights pierced the trees, sweeping across the cave entrance. The voices of federal agents echoed through loudspeakers. Federal agents, drop your weapons immediately. Captain Victor Hale stood frozen. For the first time in years, the confident smile that had hidden behind his badge disappeared completely. His deputies looked at one another, unsure what to do. One of them slowly lowered his rifle. Another stepped backward. Hale shouted, "Don't move! They're bluffing!" No one listened. Within seconds, heavily armed federal agents stormed into the cave from both entrances. Having received the evidence, Laura Bennett secretly forwarded hours earlier they had arrived with arrest warrants and tactical teams. Victor Hale, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy evidence tampering, and multiple felony offenses. Hale reached toward his ankle one last time. But before he could react, 3 red laser sights settled across his chest. He slowly raised his hands. The handcuffs clicked shut. For nearly 10 years, the man everyone trusted had finally fallen. Claire collapsed onto the stone floor. Months then, years of running, had finally caught up with her. A federal medic hurried over, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. You're safe now. Claire stared blankly ahead. She didn't answer. She simply reached toward Ranger. The old German shepherd walked over without hesitation and gently rested beside her. She buried her face in his neck and began crying. Not quietly, not politely. Years of fear poured out all at once. I thought everyone believed I had run away. Ethan knelt beside her. I know, but Ranger never stopped looking. Claire looked at the aging dog. He found me once. They pulled him away. He found me again. And this time nobody stopped him. Ranger slowly wagged his tail. His tired eyes never left hers. The investigation lasted for weeks. Once Hale was arrested, everything began falling apart. Hidden evidence lockers were discovered. Missing reports resurfaced. Several deputies admitted they had followed Hale's illegal orders for years. without knowing the full truth. The mysterious wooden crates Claire had photographed were traced to an evidence trafficking operation that had stretched across multiple counties. Deputy Collins, the officer Claire believed had been murdered, had in fact been killed after threatening to expose the scheme. Claire had witnessed everything. That was why she became the target. Not because she was guilty, because she knew too much. Months later, Black Hollow looked different. Captain Hale's name disappeared from the station walls. His awards were removed. The old missing person file bearing Claire Bennett's name was officially changed. No longer runaway. Now it read, "Recovered alive, criminal investigation solved." Ethan watched quietly as the updated file was placed into the county archives. This time, nothing would ever be erased again. Claire slowly rebuilt her life. Recovery wasn't easy. Years of isolation had left invisible scars. Loud noises still frightened her. Crowded places made her anxious. Some nights she still woke from nightmares inside the cave, but she wasn't alone anymore. She met regularly with counselors. She reconnected with distant relatives, little by little. The fear that had defined her life began losing its grip. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan drove back to the mountain, not because another mystery waited there, because he had made a promise. The old cabin had been repaired, broken boards were replaced, the leaking roof was fixed. The hidden chambers remained untouched, preserved as part of the investigation's history. Outside the entrance stood a new wooden sign, Claire Bennett Safe Shelter, dedicated to every missing person still waiting to be found. Claire stood quietly reading the sign. Tears filled her eyes. "I never imagined anyone would come back here." Ethan smiled. "I told you, this place doesn't belong to fear anymore." She looked toward Ranger. The old German shepherd walked slowly through the cabin one last time. He sniffed the worn wooden bed, the faded notebook resting safely inside a display case, the stone wall where Claire had carved desperate messages years before. Then he walked outside. He sat beneath the morning sunlight overlooking the valley. A gentle breeze moved through his silver fur. Claire sat beside him. "So many nights, I thought I was completely alone." She placed her hand on Ranger's head. "But you remembered." The old dog closed his eyes peacefully, as if hearing words he had waited years to hear. Several weeks later, the shelter officially opened as a refuge for lost hikers, abused teenagers, and emergency rescue operations. Local volunteers restored the surrounding trails. Search and rescue teams used the cabin as a temporary command post during wilderness emergencies. The place that had once hidden fear now protected lives. Exactly as Ethan had hoped. One evening, Ethan received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Ranger during the original search nearly 10 years earlier. The young German shepherd stood outside the cave entrance, staring toward the hidden tunnel. Written on the back was a short note in Claire's handwriting. "He found me the first time. The world simply wasn't ready to believe him. Thank you for believing him the second time." Ethan folded the letter carefully. He looked across the yard, where Ranger slept peacefully beneath the fading sunset. The old hero's muzzle had turned almost completely gray. His steps were slower now. His hearing wasn't as sharp, but none of that mattered, because, in the end, he had done what every great police dog hopes to do. He never gave up, he never forgot, and because one loyal German shepherd refused to abandon a scent everyone else ignored, an innocent girl came home. Sometimes heroes don't wear badges. Sometimes they walk on four legs.